Hey guys, Telegram Sam here, and I want to start out this video by saying thank you to everyone who helped me get to 300 subscribers this week. It blows my mind that one person even watches me, let alone 300 people. So thank you to everyone who subscribes, likes, comments. It really means everything to me. I feel so lucky to have this amazing community and platform to fully nerd out about music and records. So thank you to everyone. Let's go for 300 more. And I also started an Instagram. It's telegram_Sam_vinyl. I'll also write down in the description below if you have an Instagram and you're interested. Check it out. I'm also looking for more people to follow, so I would love to follow you back if you do follow me. But yeah, this week's video is going to be disappointing albums by some of my favorite artists and bands. I think to fully intellectually talk about music, you also have to talk about the bad side of music, and also the bad stuff helps you really fully appreciate good music. So let's get into those 5 albums. First off, I'm going to start with Foo Fighters' Medicine at Midnight. This was released in 2021. I think it was January of this year. So Nirvana was one of my favorite bands when I was a teenager, and of course, you know, Dave Grohl was the drummer for Nirvana, so of course I sort of evolved into liking the Foo Fighters. And of course their first like 3 or 4 albums are really great, you know, that late 90s, early 2000s like hard rock, and they were just like on top of the world. But not just this album, but I feel like their last like 4 or 5 albums have just not been what I've wanted from them. I feel like the last couple of albums they've released, you know, Dave Grohl is just such a passionate person about music, and he loves all different kinds of artists and genres. And I feel like his last 3 albums, he's kind of just sort of vomited all of his knowledge and interest in music into his albums. And I wish he would kind of just like either stick to a genre or stick to a sound. Like on this album in particular, he mixes a lot of like, you know, like hard rock, but there's also like country, but also like alternative, but also like dance, but also like disco themes to it. And it's kind of just like all over the place. And as soon as you kind of like, oh, this is the sound they're going for on this album, it kind of like takes a left turn, but like not in a good way. But yeah, I just was really disappointed by this album. I think the only song I really liked on it was Shame Shame, but everything else I'm not really that big of a fan of. I know they're going to release like a disco album under the DGs, I think. I'm actually kind of interested in hearing that, because I think if they really just stick to, you know, honing in on disco and fully like immersing themselves in it, that they can really like form out a good album. But I feel like they kind of are just like dipping their toes in a lot of pools and like stretching themselves and not really just focusing on one thing. And you can definitely hear that on this album. So not my favorite of theirs. Next, you guys know this is one of my all-time favorite artists. I talk about Iggy Pop and the Stooges religiously. This is Soldier by Iggy Pop. This was released in 1980. This was his 4th solo album. So you had The Idiot, Lust for Life, and New Values that came out before this, which are great alternative punk rock or new wave albums. And I think those 3 were produced by David Bowie. I'm not sure if New Values was, but I'm pretty sure The Idiot and Lust for Life were produced by David Bowie. But this was produced by Glenn Matlock, who was the ex-bassist of the Sex Pistols, but David Bowie was also kind of like helping Iggy Pop out during the making of this. But James Williamson, who was from the Stooges, was supposed to produce this, but I guess him and Bowie were clashing over recording, and it just ended up happening, so Glenn Matlock stepped in. But I don't know, I feel like this is sort of a parody of Iggy Pop. Like, it has his usual sort of punk rock, alternative new wave sound that he was doing during this time, but it sounds like someone's like doing a sort of cheesy impression of Iggy Pop. Like, none of the songs on this are memorable. There's not a lot of guitar sounds on this, which I feel like was kind of Iggy Pop's thing in the last 3 albums. Like there was a very heavy guitar sound on Lust for Life and New Values, and there's barely any guitar on this, which kind of leaves you with like something missing in the album. And yeah, it's just not my favorite of his, but because I'm a completist, I'm gonna have this album. But yeah, I was very disappointed by this. And next we got the t-shirt's sake, Queens of the Stone Age, Lullabies to Paralyze. This came out in 2005. This was the album they released after their very highly praised and acclaimed album Songs for the Deaf came out. Yeah, I felt like Songs for the Deaf was obviously kind of seen as their magnum opus, and then the album after this, Era Vulgaris, was sort of this gritty sort of concept album kind of based off of like the grindhouse movies of the 70s. It definitely had that sound. Well, I feel like this was them trying to be like, well, we're gonna kind of do Songs for the Deaf, but like not really, because we don't want to just copy our last album. There are a few good songs on this, like I do like Burn the Witch, Tangled Up in Plaid, and Little Sister, but there is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17 songs on this, and the fact there's only 3 that I genuinely like, wow, these are really good original songs, is kind of not a good percentage. Again, yeah, I feel like a lot of the songs on here are just trying to do what they did on Songs for the Deaf. They're trying to be different and try to like turn it into something so people will be like, oh, you're just trying to make another Songs for the Deaf. But yeah, this was the first album they made after the firing of Nick Oliveri, who co-founded this Queens of the Stone Age with Josh Homme after they both left the band Caius. And actually Mark Lanigan and Josh Homme were the only original members that were left from the Queens, or not the Queens of the Stone Age, but the Songs for the Deaf album. And you can definitely hear that. It definitely just sounds very jumbled and just, I don't know, it kind of just seems like it's everywhere and there's not really a focus on what they want to do for this album. So even though I love Queens of the Stone Age, sometimes you gotta admit, not everything they release is perfect and grand and awesome. So, and next we got the Rolling Stones, Emotional Rescue. This was released in 1980. Yeah, this was just them kind of taking the disco sound from the previous album Some Girls that they were kind of playing around with and like kind of really going all in, even though this was 1980. Disco was already pretty much dead by then, so they were kind of a little too late for that. Yeah, I just feel like every song on here sounds the same. Like the only really big single off of this album was She's So Cold, but it's not that great of their singles, and again, like every song on here just kind of sounds like She's So Cold. There's nothing really memorable about it. Yeah, I just not my favorite Rolling Stones album. My favorite Rolling Stones album is actually the one that came out after this, Tattoo You. I know that's a very controversial statement to say about the Rolling Stones discography, but yeah, this is just a really bland, boring record for the Rolling Stones. I think this was like their 17th studio album by this time, so yeah, you can definitely tell that they were sort of just kind of like giving up by this point. And then last but not least, we have Boarding House Reach by Jack White. This was released in 2018. This is his 3rd solo album. I love Jack White. I feel like 30 years from now, he's going to be seen as just such an important and influential person, and not only rock music, but just the music business in general, how he sort of revolutionized it and like did his own recordings and has his own label and is really trying to push a lot of obscure artists that were sort of lost in time back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and trying to give them a new career now. And I think that is so important, especially since a lot of them are black artists, and that is so cool and so great. And obviously the amazing stuff he did with the White Stripes, the Rock on Tours, his other solo stuff, and the Dead Weather. He's just so influential and will be just one of those artists that we'll remember forever. But this album, this album, I don't know what he was going for. You know, it has his usual, you know, sort of garage bluesy punk sound, but it sounds like he was listening to a lot of prog or sort of, you know, electric influenced alternative bands around this time, because it has this weird sort of like space agey like electro proggy thing to it that just does not mix well with his usual you know, bluesy punk sound. Obviously, I love when artists do new things, but there's sometimes when it just doesn't work out the way they think it's going to, and I think this is a prime example of that. Even when I went to go see him when he was on tour for this album, I think he only played like one song off of this album, which kind of shows that he probably didn't really like it either. But yeah, kind of disappointed by this one. I hope he releases another solo album that sort of redeems him from this one. But yeah, that's it for 5 disappointing albums by some of my favorite artists and bands. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in next week's video. Bye.